Tell us the one or two key headlines that we need to know and what your clients are the most worried about right now.
Well, thank you, Brian. Good morning. So there's a lot going on in terms of all of these tax proposals, but I think the operative word is it's a proposal, and there's going to be a lot of artful negotiation needed to get this done. So the talk of the town is really on two fronts. First is the corporate tax rate moving from 21 to 28. And really, the big action is on the international sections of the tax code and what will happen to multinationals and coordinating all of that with what's going on with the OECD. So that's one. And then certainly the later talk of the town is capital gain increases, which impacts mostly individual investors, but it's important to corporate America, as well as where should you locate your employees? I mean, there's aspects to that as well, Brian.
Yeah, 23.8 to 39.6. Do you think it ends up at 39.6, Kate, or do you think there is some compromise, even though the GOP doesn't have a lot of bargaining room, right? They don't control either house of Congress. Does it end at 39.6?
No, on the cap gain rate, too, just to point out, Brian, it really is to 43.4 because of this 3.8% investment unearned income credit that you have to add in for Medicare. And so don't forget that tax as well. So it's almost a 20% increase. And I think that there's going to be a lot of negotiation, whether this is the right thing to do. We haven't seen parity in the cap gain rate and ordinary income rate since 1986. And at that time, the tax rates were in the high 20s. This is a huge difference. And so this will have a lot of impact. Most economists will say that what will happen is investors will sell off before the rates change, and then they'll end up holding for a longer period of time. So really, one has to wonder, will this raise as much taxes as what's anticipated? Will holding periods just end up being longer to wait out whether or not tax rates change yet again? So a lot of negotiation has to happen. There's a lot of different ways to get at this. And so that's where this artful negotiation is needed.
You know, and this is where it gets a little bit wonky. Okay, I was reading a study over the weekend. Don't ask me why. I have no idea. I was with some friends golfing, but this is because I'm just this kind of dork, I guess, Kate, which is only about 1/4 of U.S. equities, the big ones, are held by sort of American individual investors. Huge global ownership of U.S. equities. How do they, if you're in a pension fund in Japan or a big investor in Europe, how do they get impacted by higher capital gains rates here, if at all? In other words, would it not maybe have the punch in the gut effect to the U.S. markets, as many of the pundits are saying, or could it have more of an impact? How does it line up?
Brian, I mean, that is the zillion-dollar question. So a lot of foreign investors, if they're coming in as pensions, will not be subject to this cap gain rate. And so what I think really has to be thought through is exactly what you're pointing out, that the owner-entrepreneur, if they're selling, is that the group that you want to have penalized, that U.S. individual? And so, you know, if that person, too, is in the state of New York or in New York City, then it's even worse. And then in California as well. I mean, you're looking at tax rates in the high 50s. And so, again, I think the biggest impact would be on that owner-entrepreneur, which, again, needs to be factored and thought through. Is that the right thing to do?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big one, Kate, because we don't often think about the foreign ownership of U.S. equities has become so much more important and meaningful. I mean, if you're at home and you got a 401k, couple $100,000 in it, what happens in Japan with U.S. equities matters a lot. Ultimately, when this all plays out, when all the sausage is made, Kate, where do you think we end up on a corporate tax rate and a capital gains tax rate?
So I think the summary is it's still early to tell, but I think that on the corporate rate, somewhere in the middle between 21 and 28, most companies can align themselves. It's really important that we line up with the global countries around the world. I mean, we don't want to have the highest rate again. And this is all the headline rate. Remember, Brian, it's what you pay, not necessarily the headline rate. But countries compete against each other on this. And so that's really important. If this were to go to 28%, once again, the United States would be the highest amongst all countries with the OECD at 28. We can't have that because when you add in the state and local taxes, it's a lot. It's in the low 30s. And so competing is important. Again, there's a lot of discussions to try to get to a more coordinated headline rate around the world through the OECD efforts. And Janet Yellen has come out and has said that she wants to participate in that more heavily, but that remains to be seen. So we'll have to see how this shapes up. But the corporate rate, somewhere in the middle, 21 to 28, probably around 25.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.